itself in, I think, as we move along. I'm Peter Kuttner. I'm going to be kind of walking us through this presentation, but I'm also here with Will and Yanel. If you want to introduce yourself and wave so your box turns green. That's Yanel.
Hi, I'm Will.
Hello, I'm Janelle.
Good to see everybody.
So I've been closely involved with the fellowship program for several years. They both actually have the experience of submitting in the last few years and having gone through what can be a tiny bit of a grueling exercise. So I think we can bring different perspectives to the process of submitting and putting your proposal together. So now that looks like we have more people here, I'm going to share my screen, and I'm showing. Well, I'll visit later the website on the. Come on. So are you seeing the AIA Honors Award or not?
Yes. Yep.
You are, okay.
Yes.
I messed myself up a little when I have two screens. So this is the PowerPoint or PDF that's available online at the AIA website that the AIA puts together and updates each year for the sort of hints on what they look for in submitting fellowships. This is actually, even though it says 2023, this was last year's show that people were presenting to be nominated, to be elected or elevated this year. So the dates are a little confusing. And they'll have the new one up sometime in June for it. We're having this presentation a little bit early in the year. We'll have it again in June. But over the last few years, people wanted to know a little bit more about submitting, because you have to submit to our nominating committee here well before that. So, you don't have to really do your submission early, but it was felt that people would like to know a little bit more about what's involved earlier. And then when you have more detailed questions later, we'll have a second one of these. So this is the submission kind of overview. So we're going to go through the overview. There's some important dates. Then we'll go through the specific pages of the submission. Then we'll step back and look at the 6 different categories that you might submit in. Talk a little bit about the jury and how the jury works, and kind of clue you in on the jury and how they may be biased in one way or another, and how you might take that into account. So the overview here is that College of Fellows was started about 70 years ago as a kind of way to honor people who've sort of done something extra, have a passion for doing more, really sort of excel in some area that contributes to the profession as well as to the AIA, as well as to society at large. So it's about 3% of the overall members. There's about 2,600, 500 fellows out of the 100,000 members or so in the AIA. And we nominate and then elevate about across the country from 70 to 110 people each year, depending on the number of people that submit and kind of the quality of the submissions and the jury at that point in time. But it is a kind of a great honor. And I think the AIA sees a lot of value, not in honoring you all as individuals, but the impact that you have on society and on the public. And we like to promote the kind of wide range of skills and a wide range of contributions that different members of the AIA contribute. This is a little bit of the mission statement for the College of Fellows. Stimulate sharing interest between fellows, but promoting the AIA itself at a higher scale, advancing the profession of architecture. And then at very specific level, and a lot of our both time and money is spent on mentoring younger architects. There's another goal here, which is not called out in the, hopefully it will be in the updated one, which is to promote research in architecture. So it's another big thing that the College of Fellows does. This is a little bit what I was referring to earlier. While only 3% of the fellows of the membership in the AIA are fellows, each year we elevate somewhere between 40 and 50% of the people who submit. So once you're do the work and nominated or considered right kind of applicant for this, then the elevation goes up higher, the percentage. So out of the 219 in 2022, 88 were elevated. So that was about 40% elevated. So there is a kind of good return on the effort to submit. This year, only 73 were elevated, but because we had less people submitting, it was still 40% succeeded. Once you've been nominated or once you begin to submit, you can do it for 3 years. And I show this here, there's less and less people obviously in each year because people get 40% of them get elected. The odds don't go down when you change to the 3rd year and the jury changes and other things change, and you have an opportunity to amend your submission, and the AIA gives you really good feedback. So it's really worth it once you've done the work of putting your package together to submit all 3 years. And then there are 6 objects, which after we talk about the submission itself, we'll go back in a little more detail on the objects. But different objects have different numbers of people submitting. That's the primary difference. Object 1 is design and object 2 is practice. So those are obviously big categories for people to submit. You can also change your category from one year to the next if you think of a different way to focus on it. So all of those things affect your success rate. So there's some important dates which aren't here because this is last year's dates, but it's always the last week in June. So sometime in the last week in June, the submission will open. And it means it's online, it's active online. The entire submission is handled through an online approach. You can do it over time. You can do it in big chunks. You can fill in different parts of time. So that's always last week in June. And then the deadline is the 1st or 2nd week in October. And they're very strict about the first day. You can wait until the last minute to start like any good architect, but the finish date is very strict. So then the submission itself, and the submission is made of a series of elements. They're very keen on you being clear and concise. I think that's true. Some of the things that they say in here are true of any kind of award submission. Results oriented, they'd like to see that your contribution to architecture has created some results. And you'll see more and more a kind of obsession with how you explain to the jury your influence on the profession. So these are the tips. I think this slide probably is a little over generous here. It's everything: who you are, what you accomplished, when you did it, why it's significant. But as you get to the end, how it benefited or was shared with the profession is a big thing because the jury doesn't know you. And so they really need, you can't be too shy. You need to really sort of figure out a way to prove and explain that it benefited the rest of architecture, the rest of society. You're eligible if you've been an architect for 10 years and a member of the AIA for 10 years, obviously an architect for 10 years. Used to be they had to be 10 years in a sequence, and there's been a couple of bad economies when people had to drop out for a year or two. And so a few years ago, we changed it. So just 10 years total. And you could have been gone for a couple of years. Some people have dropped out of the industry. Some people have moved. It's been a bit of an issue. You can go to AIA.org and find out what AIA thinks your time has been. But we've had a few people. Last year, we had a friend of mine who had 10 years when it was due, but not 10 years when you were submitting. And so they pulled it on her for that. And so she had to wait a year. There's two ways to get nominated. You can either get nominated by a petition, or you can get nominated by your chapter. The petition approach exists for the number of chapters in the country that don't have staff, or all volunteer chapters, and so it's much easier to get nominated. It could be either 5 fellows or 10 AIA members. And so in some remote chapters or smaller chapters, 10 individuals might be the only or best way to do it. We tend to do it here through because we have an honors and awards committee. They look at your name, they put a nominations list together. We tend to do it that way. It's not unheard of, though, for if you didn't make the nomination through the committee, to still do the petition with 5 fellows or 10 architects. So, and either's count. I think there's a bit of a myth that it's better to be from a state or chapter or organization. Some years that may be true, but other years it's not. We've certainly had a lot of good people go both ways.
Quick question.
Yep.
So there's a couple of us here from Western Mass. Does it
Oh, yeah.
matter if we go through Western Mass or the BSA, or is it relevant?
No, it doesn't matter.
Okay.
So you can easily go through Western Mass. We just invited everybody to the presentation just because but we weren't sure if you had your own version of it. And so it seemed nice. We're still trying, even though regions aren't quite the same, we're still trying to push everybody in our New England region, because some of the states only have 1 or 2 fellows.
Yeah.
So this is the actual composition of the submission. And somewhere along the line, the sponsor letter and section 1 switch places on this page. So you really start with a sponsor letter that just is an introduction to it. And then there's the 3 sections, and then it ends with the reference. And we'll go through each of these. But I think the idea is the sponsor is your biggest fan, and kind of it both promotes you and this presentation. And then section 1 is a kind of the overview. Section 2 gets into more detail. Section 3 then has the exhibits that support your presentation. And the end is the confidential reference letters. So the next several pages will just sort of step through this. These are the objectives to have, just kind of the rules: strong specific sponsor letter, strong specific reference letters. This will come up several times. I think in the past, there's been a lot of reference letters. You get 7 reference letters that all sound alike. The jury just goes to sleep. So you need very specific things, and I'll say it a couple of times, but you need to work with your sponsor to make sure that the references each have their own unique story that together tell a much bigger story about you. It's 40-page limit, which was good, actually. That didn't used to be a page limit. It's 8.5 by 11. They prefer landscape format, and I think the word preferred is still in there because when it came out, this rule came out the first time, people were already in the middle of doing it different ways. And the old format was when it was a print format, was the book, but everybody looks at this on their laptop. And so landscape is really, really to your advantage to look at it that way. 10-point font is the minimum. They're going to look 1 page at a time. It's not a spread. And so they need to be able to read it. And there's a lot to read in these things. So you need to make it easy for a juror to read. We'll say more about the clear, concise summary statement, but there's a kind of basically a 35-word summary elevator pitch. And there's a 1-page overview that can be bigger, but usually it's 1 page. And between those two, they really tell your story. And then people who then are intrigued and eager will then eat up the exhibits and other information they give. It's an architecture thing, so everybody likes nice pictures. Really need to push your leadership and results. that come from your work. So the individual parts, the sponsor has to be an AIA member. It's often recommended that they be an FAIA person, but certain parts of the country, there just aren't as many around, and it's maybe harder to get them. Your sponsor doesn't need to be your neighbor, doesn't need to live in your area. It can be people you've worked with or had relationships with, past jobs, other parts of the country. But they need to know you pretty well, because they're going to do a lot of work. And one of their biggest jobs is to ride roughshod over your sponsor letters. The jury now recommends not someone from your own firm. I hesitate a little because my sponsor was from my own firm, and I've sponsored other people in my firm and successfully. So it's not the end of the deal, and you need to just evaluate how strong of a case they can make for you. They can sponsor more than one person, but if you're getting somebody who's already doing somebody else and you really need them, you have to make sure you work with them to be very different than you. So they write the letter. They're supposed to be your coach in crafting your submission, and then they'll again ride roughshod over these reference writers. We actually have set up a deal with the committee that we're all on here with the existing fellows in Boston, that we'll set up little appointments too in middle of the summers when you're halfway through this process. If you want another pair of eyes to take a quick look at it and see how it's coming together, to see if it jumps out at us. So that's the sponsors, kind of the role of the sponsor. The sponsor letter gets addressed to the jury chair, and they'll send you the name of the jury chair. The sponsor's letter is one page. Everybody's letters are one page. And there's the one difference with a sponsor letter is it gets uploaded with a submission portfolio. And then it sort of lets you know what the submission is going to be like. And then it says specifics about the person. The other letters, which we'll get to shortly here, are not uploaded with the submission portfolio. The applicant gets to read the sponsor letter, work on it if they want. Whereas the other letters are entirely independent of the applicant. They are private and they're directly submitted by the reference writers. It's helpful to get reference writers who are comfortable uploading PDFs. Then section 1, this is the summary, and we kind of recommend that the summary focuses on 3 main points, and whatever you're going, whether it's practice technology or design or teaching or something like that, there's got to be something special about you that's explained in just 2 or 3 major groupings. Otherwise, one of the worst things that happens to submissions is that we all appreciate being generalists. We all strive to work in more than one field on occasion, but that's not the point of this. The point is that there's some area of your work, 50% of your work, 80% of your work, that really focuses in some one specific area where you're making a difference. And you have multiple jobs that reinforce that. And you might have written about it, or you might have given a lecture at a conference about it. But each of these things are reinforcing each other. And so it jumps out at the page. Sometimes, so you'll skip jobs that don't reinforce your theme, even though you quite like the job and it was quite successful. So you're going to do a little kind of the elevator talk and then expand those points on your summary page. The summary page is usually more prose. You're sort of talking about what you believe in and how you got there and why you think it's important and why it's worth the jury considering. The sponsor will have set you up so you're kind of talking in the same language that the sponsor talked in, so that whatever your theme is, it reverberates through the whole submission. You need to be clear, concise, insightful. There's lots of comments like that in here. The ripple effect is a phrase that's mentioned here a lot of times. And what they mean by that is that what you're doing has affected somebody else, that you can point to some organization that adopted something you developed, or you can point to the fact that you did an article that was reprinted in California, or that you spoke at a conference in Washington on that subject. So all of those things are ripple effect. The ripple effect, I think, in a lot of the jury's minds has to do with geography as well, that it's rippled out beyond Boston or New England. That it's the ripple effect is good. So people make a real effort, like to get their reference letters from people they know in other parts of the country. Could be your college roommate that moved to California, but it also might be a client you had out there, might be a politician who was in.
And so the ripple effect comes up over and over in all of this. Excuse me, my earbud died. Oh, sorry, there's a whole slide about ripple effect. So it's beyond the day-to-day, it's all the different kinds of things you do to it. And if you can point to others who've picked up on this, then you've kind of left a legacy as well. So they're very keen on this. This is what makes it more than a typical effort. So section 2 is your accomplishments, your awards and honors and things like that. This is a little bit more like a resume. These tend to be a little more list-like. And one of the things to do is, as you list your things like accomplishments, like projects you've worked on, juries, design juries you've done, other kinds of things like that, lectures you've made, AIA involvement, is to list.
And I recommend using these labels exactly, because the jury is going to kind of pick, well, did this person have presentations and lectures? It's very good to have a little section of your list of bullets that has the label that says projects, jury service, presentations, lectures, because they're going to look for this, and it's going to help them make sure you can see it. And obviously you're going to finesse things and what have you. So there's be a section on honors and awards. And then last couple of years, they've asked on the publications to distinguish ones you wrote, ones that were written about you, or ones that were written about a project you worked on. So, they're all good. I think they all have same value in there. But they're very, the idea is different. And you have time to sort of go out and crank out if you need to. This is just basically some tips on as you make those lists. Again, they're at the end here, they're make a distinction about articles that are about you, authored by you. But if you can help organize it, the worst possible thing is just a long running list that randomly turns from projects to publications to awards. So they need to be grouped together so they can kind of get a sense of where your energy is going and what you're doing. And then the third part, and this is sort of the classic part, particularly for design, but also for the others, is this is where you show 5 to 7 projects or points you want to make. So if it's a project, then it's pretty straightforward. It's 7 buildings. Explain the challenge in the building, explain what your role was, and they're going to ask you to have somebody sign off to certify that you did have as significant as a role as you claim to have, and the outcome. And you don't want to show them 30 projects. You don't want to show them 2 projects. So 5 to 7 is seems to be the sweet spot. And you still got to fit in 50 pages, and you're going to show your projects, 40 pages, and you're going to show your projects on multiple pages. It's good to do a page layout, a little bit magazine-like. It's good to use captions. Nobody wants the jury to sit around and trying to figure out which is the front of a building. So that's all helps them understand it. If you're not in design, Then it's things like leading the institute or affiliated society or working for government or things like that, teaching. So you may do one of your exhibits may be all about a class you developed or a strategic planning exercise you led for an organization you were in or things like that. So what most people do is they do several pages with that and they lead with that. And they explain it, sometimes it's a picture of a group of students on an outing, things like that. And still, if you have some projects that you can tie into what you're doing, architects like to see some buildings too. So it's nice to put a few projects following it. If students were involved in it's a class or things like that, all the better. So that's section 3. It's a big section of it. But it's very focused on output. The references, again, these are confidential. There are 5 letters. The first time you submit, you're allowed to add 2 more if you're submitting a second time, so you can have 7. And they have to be, maybe there's 7 the first time, in fact. But at least 5 have to be from architects. They have to sign their letters with their AIA designation to make sure that they are in fact. And you need to share your summary with them. In fact, the first thing you should do after you get a sponsor is contact some possible letter writers and share your summary with them. So write the summary right away. Then you can start filling it out with the section 2 and section 3. But I would go so far as to say, if you've got 7 or 8 points when you elaborated on your 3 overall points, you should, first of all, pick reference letters that are across a wider spectrum. And second of all, literally tell them, I'm making these 9 points, but I'd like you to hit numbers 7 and 8 or something like that. So that their letters show that you're a diverse person, that you have a lot of different factors. So if one person's a client and another person's a consultant you worked with, another person's a peer in your community, or a student you taught, or a professor you worked with, all of those reference letters kind of spread your summary out. They should be, it's nice to recognize leaders. And I mentioned this earlier, a good geographic range. So if they're from other parts of the country, it implies you have a bigger ripple. This last point is some people try to get really big names who frequently get several reference requirements and write the same letter for everybody. And I'm gonna barely fill a page. And so those are sort of frowned on and people don't really have too much to say. And the juries complain about them. This is how you submit the reference letters, and this is all part of keeping it confidential and allowing people who write the reference letters who may not be as glowing to do that. But they tend to mostly be glowing. I mean, people, if you pick the right people, you send a link to the writers. Usually your sponsor sends a link to the writers. So they have their own link to upload it. As soon as it's uploaded, they notify you, the system notifies you that it's been received. So you need to give them a good advance time to do it. Although lots of people
with everything.
Yeah.
Enjoy the colonoscopy.
Yeah.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, well. Right. Yeah, we can.
Somebody
keep in
needs
touch.
to mute.
Yeah. Do you have my contact?
I'm gonna
Whoever's
email
getting
you
the
tonight,
colonoscopy should
actually.
mute.
I have meeting with the client.
Yeah.
I'm gonna email you.
I can only see a small part of this people here, so I can't tell who that is.
So,
Okay.
My cell
So-
phone number. And
There you go.
There we go. We should be back. Can't send in hard copies. I actually sponsored one person one year, and the person mailed the hard copy to our marketing person, and they were almost disqualified. Your letters are rolled over, so if you submit for a second and third year, you don't have to get new letters. The it's often advised on the side to have an extra letter writer kind of queued up. I had one this year where the last letter writer didn't make it and the other person had to jump in at the last minute and send in a letter. So it's a reasonable thing to worry about. In fact, it's the biggest thing to worry about. So this is the sort of their summary of the submission part. That's clear and concise. The white space is a good thing. It's getting to be kind of a joke because people are trying to cram so much on it, particularly some of the non-design things where it's contributions to the institution, pictures of every committee you've ever been on, lots of sidebars and boxes and things. And they're kind of pleading with us to keep it attractive and a bit minimal. You should be eligible. That's a no-brainer. The sponsor is a really key thing here. And one advantage of a sponsor who's a fellow is they went through it themselves. I don't think it's as big of it's not because of the prestige of the sponsor that you're getting them as a fellow, it's because they understand it. Good references, and everybody needs to support your summary statement. If people still remember your summary statement at the end, then you've won. And the influence on the profession is just the ripple effect. One more time. So I'll explain the 6 objects. This was new last year. We added a 6th object. First one is design. And each of these objects invites you to be a little more specific if one wants to. So in design is all 3: design, urban design, and preservation. And obviously, as more and more people get more and more specialized, these are kind of important differences. So an urban design exhibit looks much different than a design exhibit, maybe more drawings and less photographs and what have you. And preservation many years ago was kind of a new entry into here. Now it's strong own part of this. You have to be largely responsible for design. You'll see in the rules when it gets more specific that there is a stamp for each project that somebody has to sign off for, who was a peer, another principal in your office, whatever, that says you are largely responsible. Don't get confused that this is a design award, though. This is an award for you. If there was an important aspect of your project, that's what you're emphasizing, not design itself. It's better to show that somebody else gave you a design award or wrote an article about it or something like that, than for you to try to make a marketing pitch for your own project. The second one is practice, and practice is now turned into sort of 2 or 3 categories. One is on the management side of practice, and on the other is on the technical side. And then more recently, we've added a specialty practice. So on the management side, it's the business of architecture. It's how you manage the office and how you manage teams and projects and what have that. On the technical side, that's more obvious. People have gotten them for a wide range of envelope design and new kinds of construction. The thing that's happened more recently, especially practice, is now a lot of architects are becoming specialists themselves. So they are having entire practices that are based on climate change or building envelopes or building systems. And so where there's now a category that you can specifically show for specialty practice. Third one is led the institute or a related organization. Led the institute is AIA roles, both at the chapter level and at the state level and at the national level. The other is a related organization, could be NCARB, could be NAB, could be other kinds of people who've been involved heavily in student organization. And you really have to, the problem with probably not a problem, but a little bit harder is with a related organization. And these are still in the building profession. You need to sort of remind the jury what that organization is all about and how they do it. Fourth one is public service, government, industry, organization. Sometimes these are real obvious. Sometimes it's very architectural, the service you offer in an organization. Other time it's more policy oriented or more organizationally motivated. So again, you need to explain to the jury how that organization works. If you remember, a small percentage of the applicants are in these categories, but there are only a small percentage of people who are awarded these categories. Fifth one is an alternative career. This is could be volunteer work with organizations that are separate. Habitat for Humanity, as we've seen in here, or other kinds of United Way if there's a case to be made for affecting the environment. You have to not be doing it for marketing reasons. You have to be doing it for the good of the organization. But you need to show how you're contributing uniquely as an architect, not just as a general purpose volunteer for other organizations. And in the new one, we separated education, research, and literature out because it was too wrapped up in the others. And so this allows you to, for teaching, for doing research, or for writing, to show your impact through teaching tools. You can show the projects you've done, that students have done, and the class you've taught. And if you're doing research, you can show how that's benefited either the industry or the profession through the research itself or the outcome of those research. So those are the 6 categories. That may be one of the tougher things for a lot of people to decide what's the space they want to be in, or what's the space that might offer them the best avenue towards moving forward. So the jury is an interesting thing, and it's worth understanding the jury because it might help you frame the way you tell the story. This was last year's jury. Actually, this wasn't even complete yet. R.K. Stewart became the chair, but this is the jury of fellows that are selected. There's 7 people. There's 6 categories, and they are spread out across the country. So we try to get geographic diversity there. We're trying to get diversity in the kinds of people that are on the jury. And we're also getting diversity. Those 6 categories, and there will be at least one person from every category who's a juror. So you won't have like 5 Led the Institute types picking who got the preservation award or something like that. There'll be somebody in your category to make the case for your category. It helps make sure that there's a kind of consistency in those things. Each juror is tries to be unbiased, so no one can if the person is, if you know the person, you disqualify yourself. If they're from your own state, we don't give you people from your own state. And if you know somebody, you recuse yourself. You know them personally. If they have anything to do with your firm, particularly nowadays in such big firms, and recuse themselves. So and then if you haven't had to recuse yourself, some people you just automatically recused. So there's not some people that only have 4 people looking at them and somebody else who has 6 people. The voting is the same for every person. And again, I said there's always somebody in every category. There's about, well, if we get 100 people get it, and we're getting 40%, there's somewhat north of 200 people submitting each year. So each of these juries divvy up the total candidates. And so any one juror will just have 30 or 40 of these proposals to look at. So they become like your patron. And your patron may be in the same category as you, they may be in a different category. but your patron learns what you did, spends a lot more time reviewing your focus. The others will do it. And then when they get together, they present to each other for about 5 minutes. They call out what you're doing. The presenter, who knows more about you, answers questions that the rest of the jurors have, and then they talk about you for about 10 or 12 minutes. And they do this over, I think, a 5 or 6 day period. So it's a pretty intense process. And so everybody's based individually. I should depart here for a minute and point out one of the things, if you do not get selected the first year, but you submit the second year or you submit a third year, they make a point of making sure you don't have the same patron the next year or the year after that, because you never know if you appeal to one person more than you appeal to another person. So you get that chance to appeal to a different person. Also, a third of the jury changes every year. So you got different people. You may have different people in your category or in other categories who might be more intrigued by what you do. So that's one of the reasons the jury is managed the way it is. One of the reasons it makes sense to keep submitting. These are the questions they had. It's exactly what we said over and over in the submission. The ripple effect, are you nationally recognized? So those are initial questions that they'll ask. And then they'll look at your body of work. They'll evaluate if you were what you contributed to it. And the jury looks at the results of what you've done. So it's essentially everything it said in the first part. That's what the jury looks at. They look at right down the list. That's one of the reasons to even call out a label. If you call out publications and they've got a few, they may or may not have time to look at the actual publications, but they saw you had some. And your patron would have had more time to look. They do like to see if you've had AIA scholars, leadership roles. It is, after all, an AIA award. So it kind of was birthed in recognizing people who did AIA things. But we all know there are people who kind of just do AIA things and other people who spread out in 2 or 3 areas. And some people who are quite remote. And so over the time, those 6 objects have been added to, and they've grown to recognize that we want to get people who are writing, we want to get people who teach, we want to get people who work for government or work for industry. It's a great message for the public that architects are in all these places doing all these things. And so while we maybe focus a little bit on where you contribute and narrow the range, we're really broad when it comes to the number of people who become fellows and kind of can paint that bigger picture of architects. So the resources, and I'll switch over here to the website. There's a bunch of stuff on the AIA.org for the fellows, and then you can talk to honors and awards who have a link in this PDF, both for eligibility and for just basic requirements, like how to fill this thing out. And they're really good, I'm told lately, at answering these questions. So if I just quickly switch to honors and awards on the AIA website. This is the honors and awards site. And it's under about, I think. If you go to the about pull down menu, there's for awards, there's programs and recipients. So if you go to programs, you get this honors and awards page. There's a pull down menu here, and you can pick fellowship, and that's one of them. And you can say then learn more about fellowship appears. And so this is the classic page for you to go to take a look at what's available. It shows you, and it repeats what I just said about eligibility, the submission requirements, who's on the jury, past recipients, and then frequently asked questions. So those are all there. And I'm on eligibility here. It lists the criteria, and as you scroll down, you can see it outlines those objects and talks, a little bit of detail on the 6 objects that you need to know about. The submission requirements are entry fee, and over on the right, the dates will be put on. And then there's a series here of examples of successful applications. And so people have found these really useful. They've done them for the last 4 or 5 years. But you can go in and in your category, you can click on somebody. And so you can see here, Object 1 Design, which has urban design submissions, and preservation. So it says what one they were in and what year they submitted. So here there's 4 years worth of them. If you know somebody, it's interesting to take a look at them. But the jury, at the end of each jury, picks a couple of these to submit to the website for everybody's. So you can look at them for graphic ideas. You can look at them for how people organize information. They're quite doing. And there are half a dozen for each category. And when you get to the very bottom of this, and it's hard to remember where this is, where it says additional researches, that's that PDF we just walked through. So everything that was in that PDF is on this website page, and you can download the PDF. And they should be updating it in another month or 2. The jury is more complete here, so you can see some of the people here. R.K. Stewart was the previous chair, so I don't know who, but 2 of those people will switch out this year. Every 3rd year, 3 people switch out who take over, and each of those was in a different category for their own fellowship. There's a little blurb here for so it says here for 2024 there's going to be 3 new jurors, and if you're interested, you can also submit to be a jury as soon as you get your own fellowship. And then these are the facts, demographics, your ideas for your sponsors. It's a lot of the things that are said in that presentation. So it's all there, and that will be it. So I'm going to stop sharing so people can see each other. And Will is here and Janelle is here, so anybody can ask questions.
I would offer that one of the things, I was on the strategic council for the last 3 years, and I guess it's strictly forbidden to reach out to the board or the members of the strategic council about your fellowship. You'll be disqualified. However, there is the
I
opportunity.
never heard that.
Yeah. And I think it's on one of these pages buried in there.
Oh,
but,
okay.
But what does happen is that the board and the council get a list of the people who have applied, and we, or the council members and the board, have an opportunity
right.
to write
you can't
letters of
request that.
privilege. You can't
Right,
request
you
it,
cannot request a letter of privilege, but you can
if,
smile nicely.
right, you could, there's people who you may know who could write you a letter of privilege if they're aware, or they see
A
your
letter
name.
of privilege is in addition to the letters that are required.
Right.
They follow the same rules generally, 1 page and write what you like. The jury doesn't like them, that I've heard the last couple of years. I'm not, they don't
Interesting.
like them. They don't consider them as powerful as the person who knew your submission. And if the person knows your submission and writes a letter of privilege, then there's something kind of untoward happening, because they shouldn't know that
So-
much about you.
So
about
just
your
consider it the
submission.
3rd rail.
Yeah. And you can't talk to people on the executive committee of the fellows either, if you happen to know anybody.
So we're not having this conversation, Peter?
I'm off now. Other questions? I saw you had a comment. What was?
I just mentioned that my submission under object 5, which I admit, is not a typical object, is posted as an example, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Oh, excellent.
But you can just look at it as well.
I have a question. How is it determined who gets
AIA component support?
There's an honors and awards committee, and they have a request out for submissions, and you can send them a letter. Is it Eric or Patricia still on? You can, I don't know what the deadline is. You can send them a letter. And Eric, is there a form?
There's no form. Just submit your name. You can actually send it to either Patricia or me.
There's Patricia, she just popped up.
Correct. They're in review right now, but the timing's perfect.
Yep.
If you're interested, just send us an email and a letter.
So does that mean anyone who fills out that form gets support?
Generally,
No,
oh, go ahead, Peter.
I was going to say the jury decides. The honors and awards group decides. If they don't support you, you can always do the other. I will be honest, and our attitude here is we would like to have more candidates than less. We don't consider our jury part of the jury to winnow people out. We would like to see our jury honors and awards group as a way to sort of harvest people for these awards. We've had years when the jury, our honors and awards group was very tough and didn't nominate very many people. And so we're trying to encourage them to nominate more.
And I will say that I missed the timing to be nominated through the chapter only because I made my decision to submit very late or later than they had already done their process, and I had to do it by signature. And I was already very involved at the BSA, so it's not like I was not a known person. It's just that I missed the process and the deadline.
So did the current AIA president, Emily. So she had to do it 10.
And what is that deadline again?
I think actually in the next couple of weeks, if you can get it to us, and all you need to do is send your name. Send your name and that you're interested in fellowship from the BSA. If you just send the name, we might not know what you're talking about, but.
It's a lot of work, but I have to say it's kind of the biggest single bit of work is probably the least bang for the buck in the presentation, and that's finding that article that Banker and Tradesman did, or trying to remember what you did at Build Boston back when there was a Build Boston. Those kinds of things are, but it's nice to get it all together. Everybody sort of feels like it was rewarding in a funny way to sit down and collect your thoughts that way.
Very rewarding when I pushed send on October 6th. Huge relief. And just, I mean, I have a small firm, and for anyone here who has a small firm, it could be really daunting. It is a lot of work, and for firms like mine, we don't have people on staff who can really help. So it's important to pick a sponsor who's a good editor. And
well, I have to say, I think coming out of the last couple of years of not enough work and then too much work, the number of people who submitted have dropped down. And I noticed, I think all 5 people work at firms with marketing departments that got it this year.
Yeah.
Which isn't always the case. In some years it's very evenly distributed, but
yeah.
I think we're coming out of a tough period where there was an advantage to the bigger firms.
And that, our College of Fellows committee at the BSA wants to be helpful to anybody who has any questions and during the process. And my interest is especially for people who are from smaller firms who, it would be really beneficial to bounce ideas off of. I also picked a wonderful sponsor who said basically, I'll write the letter, but I'm not doing anything else. And so I had to hunt down or remind my letter writers, of the deadline. And even on the last day, we were waiting on two letters. It's pretty stressful to do that. But I think it's it's important, obviously. Do exactly what Peter's presentation says. Just that's the lesson number one. I think they tell you exactly how they want to see it, and don't try to outsmart them or invent a better presentation system. It's really the content that matters. And 40 pages, at the end of the day, it was easier to get to that point. It's good to edit things down and keep some white space, like Peter said.
Yeah. If you think of one of these jurors looking through even 30, 40 page presentations, and everybody's pretty sincere about wanting to do a good job of being thorough, and when they present to the other 6, not sounding like they didn't really read it. That's still a lot to learn, and you need to be easy on the eye and make it easy for them to prove you had everything. Anything else?
Is there
I
someone
forget.
we can reach out to if we have specific questions about the application? Things like, should our projects be in chronological order or reverse chronological order, or whatever?
You can email me, and you can email Patricia, and I'll copy the committee. Some questions will be more, you want to sit down and review it over coffee, and some will be chronological order, and we can decide who answers what.
Email you and who else?
Patricia is our BSA.
The emails are
Fellows
posted in the
liaison.
chat.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
We're happy to advise.
Thanks for reminding us all. I think I participated in this one last year. And it was still, and I looked at the website since, and this was still really full of really good tips that I had forgotten about. So thank you,
Oh,
Peter.
good. Are you going to submit?
Yeah, I think I'm going to try this year. Last year, I was just putting my toes in the water. I have a
Yeah,
friend who I just emailed, Heather. Do you know Heather Taylor?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Thinking about doing
yeah.
it. She may not do it this year. She may do it next year, but I told her to just express interest. And I guess I've outed her now.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, lots of people don't do it right away.
I will
But,
say in your case, knowing your body of work with the university and how you have championed sustainability, you have a very strong submission.
Wow, Yanela, I might hold you to that.
Yes,
letter.
yes.
Yanel might be on the jury this year. Or
I'm not.
Oh,
I'm
well,
not in the jury.
that's
No,
fine.
I have not been asked.
That's
So.
really great. Thank you.
Mhm.
Okay, well.